Buying a set of speakers and a suitably matching amplifier can be a daunting process. After all, how do you know which amp is going to suit your speakers? How much power do you need? Will they sound good together? It can all become too much. Well, in some professional music studios, they use a type of speaker that can solve this problem. They use what are called active speakers or active monitors. Both of those terms mean the same thing, and what they mean is that they're speakers with the amplifiers built in. With active speakers, you plug each speaker into the power and then into your preamp or into a DAC with the volume control. There are no power amps or integrated amps needed because they're already inside the speaker. As with any speakers, you can spend a little bit or a lot on actives. The ADAM Audio T7V sits at the lower end of that spectrum. They're not right at the bottom, but they're very affordable for what they are at $250 each. In other words, they're $500 per pair. If you're wondering why I told you the individual price, it's because that's how they're sold. So don't get tripped up by that one and accidentally buy a single speaker. They're sold as single speakers because some studios might use just one of them, 4 of them, 5 of them, it depends on what they're setting up. However, before you even go off and buy some of these, it's going to be worth finding out if they sound good. While we will get to the answer of that question in just a moment, let me briefly discuss 2 things with you first. Firstly, these can accept an input via XLR or via RCA, but as I mentioned before, you will need a way to control the volume. There's a dial on the back of the T7V that adjusts the amount of gain they provide, but it's not a volume control as such. It helps you match up the amount of amplification provided by the speakers internally to whatever's coming out of your DAC or your preamp. On top of that, it will be a pain in the ass to use because the dials are on the back of the speakers and they're individually controlled. And so these dials, as I mentioned, are designed to get the speakers set up right when you initially set up your system, but then from then on, the volume should be controlled through a preamp or a DAC with volume control. The other thing that I wanted to mention really briefly before we move on is today's video sponsor. And don't worry, this will be really quick. iFi are kindly sponsoring today's video. They make all kinds of audio devices from the super compact Hip DAC 3 or GoLink Max through to premium DAC, headphone amp and preamp combos like the Neo iDSD2. If you enjoy the channel and you need any of the types of gear that iFi produce, then just click through the link in the description below to make your next iFi purchase. Thank you for any and all support. When it comes to sound quality, it's worth noting that the T7Vs can output a lot of sound, up to 110 decibels from a pair of these when used in a near-field setup, meaning you're sitting about 1 meter away. That still means over 100 decibels if you're sitting a bit further back, and so these have got plenty of volume for most situations. It is worth noting though that you might need to turn the gain dial on the back up a little bit to get enough volume depending on your source chain. I found that they needed significantly more gain applied than the higher spec ADAM Audio A7V speakers, and that's partly going to come down to what preamp or DAC you're using. What matters more though is the quality of the sound that you're going to get once everything's dialed in. The sound from the T7Vs is crisp, punchy and energetic. Being a studio monitor, these are designed to be neutral, and we'll discuss tuning them to suit the room in just a moment. For now though, it's worth noting that depending on the room and how they're set up, the tonality of these is a neutral speaker as you'd expect. And so when I say that they're crisp, energetic and punchy, what I'm referring to there is the character of their sound. It comes down more to how the 7-inch woofers and the UART ribbon tweeters are delivering the actual sound waves. There's a sense of precision and control from these that I think is better than their price tag. And I think that's probably a good example of trickle-down technologies from the higher A7Vs, the S2Vs, I think they're called, the really high-end ones. I've got those coming up for review soon. Much of what we're seeing in the T7Vs is a price-adjusted version of technologies from the much higher models. And that means we get to enjoy the benefits of those technologies despite these costing less. They're not quite as nicely finished as something like the A7Vs, but the sound quality isn't far behind. Having said that, it's not perfect. The clean, crisp delivery from the T7V results in an outstanding soundstage and excellent imaging properties. Everything's tightly focused in space and the soundstage is clear and wide. Where the price limitations do show themselves a little bit is that the soundstage is quite two-dimensional. These don't create a lot of sense of depth of layering of the instruments, and so it sounded here in my office like all of the instruments were lined up level with my computer monitor. Ideally, I would have liked to hear the vocals or the primary instruments level with my computer monitor, and then the backing instruments stretching out behind. Thankfully, this doesn't damage their enjoyability, but it does hold them back from being perfect. Having owned the KRK Rocket 5 G4 speakers, also an active monitor if you're not familiar with them, having owned those for quite some time, I'm very comfortable saying that the ADAM Audio T7Vs are significantly more impressive. Both more impressive, but also probably more importantly, they're more engaging. I felt like I wanted to listen to music more through the T7Vs. They deliver a crisp, bitey treble on a track like Wolf in Sheep's Clothing, but only because that's how the track is meant to be. And I know that because sounds like the cymbals in Wolf in Sheep's Clothing are beautifully handled. It's just the electronic sounds around the cymbals that have that sense of bite and energy to them. And that's true when I listen to World Turning as well. Again, the hi-hat is pristine. It's focused and it's textured, but it's not over-enhanced or pushed forward. The left-right separation is fantastic, and the kick bass is punchy and solid. Once again, the only thing holding the T7Vs back here is their relative lack of soundstage depth. I say relative because that's relative to the incredible passive speaker setup that I had on my desk directly before the T7V showed up. That setup, though, costs over 10 times the price of the T7Vs, so let's be fair. Across genres like R&B, rock, pop, blues, jazz and classical, the T7Vs were consistently enjoyable to listen to across all of those, and therefore will be equally as strong for those producing that sort of music as well. They have switches on the back that can help to boost or cut the bass and the treble as you need to for your room, and they provide very accurate control. In other words, they don't shift the frequencies they're not meant to. If you increase the bass, it doesn't change anything else, it only changes the bass. That's not always true for cheaper versions of this kind of implementation. Now, if you move to the next level up in the ADAM Audio range to the $800 each or $1,600 per pair A7Vs, they show you what's possible when you can throw even more money at a problem. But the T7Vs are an excellent starting monitor. Speaking of the A7Vs, I might have sparked your curiosity a little bit, so let me provide you with a really brief comparison now before doing a full review on these in just a couple of weeks. If you have $1,600 to spend on active monitors or speakers, the A7Vs are impressive. They're a more premium looking and feeling speaker than the T7Vs, with more impressive controls to adjust for your room. Amazingly, they also manage to sound even better, and I wasn't sure that was possible because the T7Vs already sounded so great. That one's for you, Chuck. From the A7Vs, the bass is just a bit more solid and a bit more tightly controlled. It's not enhanced in any way, it's just better quality. The imaging is also even more remarkable from the A7Vs, and that makes everything more lifelike and realistic. I was finding the A7Vs to be as enjoyable as they are accurate. Soundstage depth is probably still the only thing that I feel like they're lacking a little bit, but again, that was compared to a much higher end and higher priced passive speaker setup. And the A7Vs are still a little bit better than the T7Vs when it comes to soundstage depth. On the A7Vs, you get more range of adjustment for the sound, as well as a couple of different sound profiles that can quickly make the speakers a bit more musical and engaging, or keep them really neutral for mixing and mastering purposes. And you can even connect them to some special software from Sonarworks to tune them very precisely to your room. And so, as I mentioned before, subscribe if you want to see all of that sort of functionality in the A7Vs. But let's now come back to the T7Vs. And specifically to say that I hope I didn't just overshadow the T7Vs by talking about the A7Vs. Yes, the A7Vs are better, but the T7Vs get so close to the same levels of performance and enjoyment with such a lower price tag that I think they're remarkable. If you need a speaker solution that's accurate and neutral, but also enjoyable and lifelike, I think the T7Vs are a brilliant choice for the money. When I reviewed the ADAM Audio H200 headphones recently, I teased that I thought this review was going to be the first one where I wasn't completely positive about an ADAM Audio product. I was almost completely wrong. I say almost because there are a couple of things that I didn't completely love about the T7Vs. You already know that I wish they had a little bit more sense of depth in the soundstage, and the other thing that I do wish they had was an easier way to turn them on and off. Because these are active, they can get noisy when the preamp is switched off and the circuit becomes open. The only way to combat that is to switch off the speakers or to leave the preamp switched on. I like to save energy, and so that means switching everything off, but to do that means an awkward reach around on each of the speakers. And it's far less fun than it sounds. Having an auto on-off feature, a front standby button, or even a 12-volt trigger system on the T7Vs would be an absolute godsend for home audio systems. Maybe for studios too. But if that's the worst of your problems, you're doing pretty well. You can always just plug the T7Vs into a smart power board and switch them off with the touch of your smartphone. And the rest of the time, all you're going to be focused on is how great these sound for how little money you spent on them. And so if you'd like to experience that feeling for yourself, I'll put some links down below where you can go and check out the T7Vs. As I'm recording this, I don't know what those links will be, but I'll find something and I'll put them down there to make things easier for you. Now, of course, if you're not yet keen to spend $500 on your desktop sound and you want to keep the prices a bit lower, you can actually get a different speaker that's almost as good sonically and in some ways even better than the T7Vs. So watch this video next to see why the ADAM Audio T7V micro speakers might be even more impressive than the T7Vs. And that's despite costing just a little bit more than half as much. For now though, thank you to YouTube channel members, thank you to channel Patreon members, and thank you to those of you who leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.